Everybody, I'm excited to see a couple of new faces and returning faces. That's always good. It's our third in a three-part series in this week, and we're going to continue these things down the road, and we'll continue to have workshops. Keep an eye out for our announcements. Keep an eye out for the daily announcements, and also we have a calendar, and it's in the back. We have a handful left. We actually printed 500 of those, and they're just about gone. So they've been really popular. That's good. I think people are taking them to use them. Project management is the third in the series because it's going to wrap a bow around what we've done. Marketing plan, the action plan, and now project management on a much bigger holistic scale. We're only going to be able to scratch the surface, and I'll tell you why. Project management is a big deal. People throw around project management as if it's something to be taken lightly, but I want to give you a little statistic here and show you something. The PMI, Project Management Institute, certifies project managers. When I worked at UPS Capital, I sent everyone that worked for me that was responsible for project management to this institute to get certified. Before they could get certified, you have to have a 4-year college degree and at least 3 years of project management experience with 4,500 hours leading and directing projects and 35 hours of project management education. That's just to apply for the PMP, Project Management Professional. So project management is a big deal. The reason it's a big deal is handling projects wrong can be devastating for an organization. Absolutely devastating. You waste money, you waste time, and you run off good resources and people because of frustration. So project management's a big deal. On a smaller scale, it's a big deal because it can allow you to accomplish a lot with fewer resources, especially because they're managed efficiently. So what we're going to talk about today are the basics of project management. And I'm going to spend a lot of time on something called scope, and we're going to spend a lot of time, we briefly touched on scope yesterday, and we're going to spend a lot of time on some of the mechanics that you might want to look into, that might want to apply to projects going forward. So if we look at what project management is, similar to what we've defined the last couple of things, is planning, organizing, securing, and managing resources to achieve specific goals. Key word being specific goals, key words. Just as in the action plan, you've got to have objectives. Project management and a project has to have specific goals. This can be a little bit tricky. We're going to talk about specifying the goals in a minute, but vague goals, non-measurable goals, non-milestone goals, which means they can't occur in a certain place, they get thrown in quite a bit to the mix, and it is devastating to a project. You don't know when you're accomplishing anything, and that's one of the big downfalls. The other thing I'll tell you about project management, it is an orchestration of a ballet to some extent. A lot of moving parts, a lot of people, and the project manager is the director of the ballet or the conductor of the orchestra. So that role is critical, and you have to understand some of the basics as you go through. There are a couple of stages of project management that you have to be aware of, and these are definite, defined stages that have to have a conclusion each and of their own right. Defining the project. This goes back to our objectives, outcomes, and scope. The planning the project. There is a separate project planning piece of project management. That has to involve all parties, and it identifies work and assigns the work. Similar to what we talked about yesterday in the action plan, but on a much broader scale. Executing the project, you'll hear about production. This is when a project goes into production. There's a lot of defining and planning on the front end of a project, and until you push the button, until you have a start date and you start executing the project, it is not in production, and it's not an active project. It is still in the planning stage. And then finally, the closing of the project, which I call the client presentation. And the reason I say that is because a lot of times we end, and yesterday we talked about an after-action review item on an action plan. What this is talking about is a client presentation. We've completed the project. We met the objectives. Let us walk you through what we've done. That's a point that's missed a lot of times when a project manager will hand off a project thinking it's a close. Instead of closing out, they'll dump a big binder with information and data, and the client's responsible for going through and understanding it, and the project's not closed properly, and it doesn't end in a successful project. So it's really important. Let's take a look at objectives. What are the reasons you're doing a project? Has anybody been in this situation where we do a project and we ask, why are we doing this, and no one can answer the question? That happens all the time. We're going to have a project. We're going to be project X, project Y. Well, why are we doing it? I don't know. I have no idea. And then they attempt to define a project or reasons for doing a project, and they get confused with project objectives. For example, project objectives are not the same as project products. The objective of our project is to install System X. That's not a project objective. System X is going to be doing something. It doesn't pass what we call the so what test. Okay, so what? You install this system, then what? Well, if the system has to do with customer service, or if it has to do with production, has to do with improving an aspect of it, then we're getting closer to an objective. They have to be specific. A specific objective leads to a specific outcome. To improve customer relations is not measurable. So we're going to install System X. Well, that's not a project. That's not an objective. That's a project product. That's a product of the project. Well, okay, we're going to improve customer relations. You know, that's getting closer, but it's not measurable. That's not what the system's for. Our objective is to reduce customer complaints by 50%. That's measurable. Okay, how are we going to do that? Part of that, one of the products, is we're going to install System X. So, reduce customer complaints by 50% is measurable, it's specific, and it's an example of a reason for doing a project. And don't confuse project products with project objectives. The big thing you need to look at with scope, I'm going to give you a visual example here, is scope. Anybody heard of scope creep? What's scope creep? Scope creep is when you start a project and then someone has all kinds of advice for you. Usually they're not responsible for the project and they add something on. And then somebody else has some expert advice on the side which is going to add to your project. And pretty soon the scope starts to creep. What you thought you were doing has now been expanded. And when it expands, you're going to run into a couple of different boundaries that we're going to see in just a second. Two main components of a scope, and that's deliverables and boundaries. What are you delivering, and then what are the boundaries around that? And boundaries are statements to help you separate things applicable to that particular project and things that are not applicable to that project or out of scope. And it doesn't mean that they're not important. That's one of the big mistakes that project managers make, is someone makes an argument that a piece of a project is important or in addition to the project's important, and everybody agrees. They say, do you not agree that this is an important thing we do? Yeah, it is important. Great, then we should add it to the project. Okay, I guess you're right. Now your scope is creep. Instead of, I agree that it's important we do this. It's just not in scope of this project because of the boundaries that we have set for us. Simple examples. The project will affect U.S. operations only. The other locations are out of scope. That's a boundary. A South American operation or an Asian operation is out of scope because it's not within U.S. Doesn't mean they're not important. It means they're outside the scope of the boundary. We will deliver our solution to the finance and legal departments. All other departments are out of scope. This is a big problem students need to understand when you start talking about departments in a college, or you start talking about projects within a group. Pretty soon everybody will want to join into your group, or they'll want to ask you for your project to include other groups. It's not being mean if you tell them if it's out of scope, it's being realistic. Because scope consists of a couple things. If we look at the quality of our project, which we want high quality, we want good quality, we're bounded by a couple of things. The scope, which are the deliveries and the boundaries, the time, and the cost. And I like to look at it slightly different. I like to look at scope in the center of this triangle. And I like to say, given your cost, given your time, given the quality that you want, what's your scope like? In this situation, I'd argue that your scope's too small. And if you came to me with a project, and if we talked with some of our students through our Success Initiative program with projects, we might tell you, I think your scope's too small. Given the time we have, I'm going to say cost, which there's a lot of differences in cost, not only monetary cost, but time cost, personal investment cost. And given the quality that we expect, I really think your scope's too small. You need to expand it. Well, the other problem, wow, it's a big project. We've had students that come and say, I want to do some spectacular things. I want to change laws. I want to abolish the death penalty. I want to do things. That's fantastic. They're noble. But given our cost, given our time and the quality we want to be able to do these projects with, that scope is way too big. So the point is, let's match our scope with the amount of time, the amount of cost, and the amount of quality we want out of a project. Really, really simple concept. Really, really important. It gets misunderstood. You know, the big challenge with this is someone is going to want to continue to grow that triangle, right? Let's take more time. Let's take more cost. Let's get it even more quality. The question you need to answer with respect to time, cost, and quality is this. Pick any two. What do you want? You want it fast and you want high quality? What's it going to? It's going to cost you a lot of money. You want it cheap and you want it fast? Quality is going to be low. You want it cheap and you want high quality? That's going to take me a long time. This, in my opinion, is the irrefutable law of scope. Physically, it's impossible to achieve all three at the same time. And we get lulled into sleep to say, you can do it fast and cheap and tremendous quality. That's relative. Cost is relative, time is relative, and quality is relative. But you can only deliver two in a project. Only deliver two boundaries of the same project. This is really critical. Does everybody understand? Does everybody have any questions about this? I have never, ever been in a situation where all three have been able to be matched. Low cost, high quality, quick time, and manage appropriate scope. You can get lulled to sleep by having a scope very small. So if your scope, in the first slide I showed on the triangle where the circle of the scope in the middle was quite a bit smaller than the triangle, it was a small scope project, you can pretend that you're having all three, you're delivering all three, but you're not because your scope is significantly smaller than your resources and your boundaries.
So you're saying, what I'm trying to understand, because of these parameters, you would purposely expand the scope of the project?
No, you want to purposely balance the scope of the project. Because what happens if you balance it, when you get to this situation, you're in perfect balance. I've got a time defined. We've project planned. We've estimated the time we're getting through production. We've got a cost base that we're pulling into this. And we have a quality level that we're going to QA this. We're going to quality assure this as it goes through. As you start this, someone's going to come and say, I want it faster. You cannot deliver it faster, maintain the same scope, if your cost and your quality have already been defined. Right? Something's got to give. It's going to cost you more money. Okay, great. I can spend more money. No, you can't spend money. Well, I can reduce the quality. No, you can't. I need you to keep all those the same. You just need to make it faster. But what you're asking me to do is deliver on all three of these with a scope that has already been defined within these parameters. It can't be done.
Assume they're already defined properly.
Exactly. Assume in the beginning when you're defining them properly. And that's why it's important. That's why we spend a lot of time on scope. To get it right, if you get it right, it is going to define, or it's going to actually give you the best chance of success. And it gives you the best argument against outsiders coming in and saying, I need you to increase the quality. Great. I'm going to increase the quality at my same cost? Yes, it's your same cost. Then I need more time. Can I have more cost? Absolutely, you can have more cost. Well, then I can do that. I can increase the quality. But my time is going to remain the same. No, I need it in a quicker amount of time. I can't do all three of them. That's the logic that you need to wrap your arms around when you're defining scopes and projects. Very, very critical point. This is where most projects come off the tracks. And this is where you see extra money, over budget, not on time, and the quality's not there. Something has come off the track early on. So, pick any two as you go through. Assumptions and constraints. As you go through a project, you're going to have to make some assumptions. You do not know everything up front. You do not know what's going to happen. There's a set of circumstances and events that need to occur for the project to be successful. You're going to have to assume some things are going to happen. You're going to have to assume, if you're doing a project on Wofford's campus, that there is going to be a building or a room available for your project if it needs it. You're going to have to assume that you're going to be able to recruit certain volunteers. You can't go into it with a no assumptions at all. Assumptions are accepted as true without proof or demonstration. It just, given our experience, we are experienced. Everyone in here has lived a certain portion of their life and has some experience, and there's a sense check on certain things that you can do or you cannot do. Constraints are things that might restrict, limit, regulate the project. Constraints are outside of your control. These are things that I can't directly control. I've got to work towards and I've got to realize. For example, the size of a budget. That's a constraint. I can't control it. I've issued a budget. I'm going to have to work around that. So my project's going to have certain assumptions, and it's going to contain certain constraints. And that's just a given. As you walk through risks, You need to make sure that you identify risks up front. And there's three things: identify, assign a probability, and then an impact if realized. Here's what happens all too often with identifying risk. I've identified my risks and I just stop there. And say, yes, this is a risk. And if it happens, we'll just deal with it. Well, I'll tell you a little story about what happened in identifying risks, assign probability, and impact if realized. When I was working in Europe, we were opening up a couple of offices, one in Spain and one in Portugal. And the way we were going to do it was not in line with customer law. And we knew that. So we talked to our attorneys, and we said, we've got a couple of risks here, and we're not sure how big the risks are. We can identify them. We don't know the likelihood of them happening, and we definitely don't know what the impact is if realized. So the attorneys came back and said, your risk in Spain is if you get caught, and you'll probably not get caught, but if you get caught, and there's a 10-15% chance you'll get caught, it'll cost you about $500,000. I said, I'm okay with that, because we're not breaking any laws. It would just be an extra cost, and we're going to make a lot more money than that. So I'm willing to take the 10% risk that I have to pay $500,000. I'm okay with that. I said in Portugal, the problem is you have about a 2% risk of getting caught. Well, that sounds good. That's a probability. But if it's realized, you have to shut down. And I said, I'm not willing to take that risk, even though the probability is incredibly low. Couldn't risk having to shut down the business because of a low impact, because of a probability, because of impact if realized. So you need to balance that. And that is, what are you willing to take? What's the probability that this risk is going to happen? And what's the impact if it's realized? And there may be a low impact and a high probability, and you say, I don't care because the impact's low. And you might have the reverse, where the probability's low and the impact's high, and you decide not to take that risk because of that. All through your project, you're going to have to identify these risks. You're going to have to lay them out, assign a probability to them, impact if realized, ask yourself, ask your team, and your whole project management system, are you willing to take that risk? Success criteria are something that is similar to, why are we doing this project? And everybody chuckled and nodded their head, because you all get projects that, why are we even doing this? Another problem that happens is, what does success look like? When do we know we had a good project? And the project being good does not mean that we just installed computer X. Hey, we installed computer X. Let's dust our hands. Remember, that was a project activity. That wasn't an objective. But we celebrate. Success looks like an installed program. That's not what we're looking for. What is your criteria for success? How do I know I've completed the project? This is where milestones come in. As you go from your project, you should have many, M-I-N-I, not M-A-N-Y. You should have many milestones. And these milestones along the way are going to tell you, boy, I've accomplished something. I've hit a milestone, and the milestone might be simple as I've received approval to do my project and host it in this particular room, or it could be large. A milestone is we've implemented the computer system that's going to allow us to reduce customer complaints by 50%. That could be a milestone in and of its own. So you need to know what success looks like. You have to know when you've completed the projects, and you do that by completing many milestones along the way. And how do you know you've done a great job? This is a tough one. The tough one is because we ask people for feedback, and once a project is complete, just because it's done, people assume it was a good job. If you go back to the triangle, if you go back to the scope, time, cost, and quality, given that, how do you know you've done a good job? What do you think? In budget? On time? And the quality is anecdotally or measurably, depending on the product, is there. So you can go back to your scope document, you can go back to your levels of quality, you can go back to your time document, and you can define whether or not you've done a great job. I would highly recommend you don't rely on individuals to tell you whether you've done a good job or not. What does everybody say, especially here in the South? Great job. Fantastic. That's beautiful. And everybody gets really excited. I did a good job. But you know what? People are nice. We don't do a good job of doing critiques. And if you just ask people about that project, they're going to say, it's fantastic. Now, we have fantastic projects around Wofford all the time. And we do things really, really well. And I think most of them, I assume most of them are measured objectively on budget, on time, and I know the big projects like the buildings are measured by that, but a lot of the little projects are, great job, way to go. Don't fall into that trap. Ask for constructive feedback. Look at your own measures and your objectives, which goes back to how will this be measured? If you are not measuring it against your original costs, your original budget, your original quality, and your objectives, if you don't go back to them, then you are kidding yourself. And you will not have a happy group. And the reason you won't have a happy group is because as everybody's telling you, good job, way to go, then you move on and they start to use the fruits of your project. They start to use the system, the results. And very quickly, from a user acceptance standpoint, they see that it works or it doesn't work. And if everybody's congratulated you and you're short on the measurements, then you're going to have a disaster project. And that's not good. So, where do you start? When you do a project, understand the project that you're getting into. And that includes understanding the entire concept. How's it going to impact everybody around us? What are we really trying to do? Why are we doing this? One of the biggest mistakes we make in project management is not contacting, I'm calling the client, whoever's going to be the user of this. And I'll give you some small examples. I spent a lot of time in finance in my career, and I've made a bunch of mistakes. One of the greatest things about being older and older, it means you just made a lot of mistakes and you've accumulated a lot of experience. Experience is another word for I've screwed up a lot, so listen to me. With finance, there's a lot of different mechanisms, systems, reports that go into place. One of the biggest mistakes in my life, and I've learned over the years, is not contacting people that it affects before something goes into effect. Not contacting my client, the responsible party, the stakeholders. We listed stakeholders yesterday on the action plan. Even if it is just a quick, I'm getting ready to engage in a project, please take a look, give me your thoughts. If the person says, this looks great, go for it, I'm really excited, at least you've cleared it. I fail in that on a regular basis because from a strengths perspective, I'm an activator, which means I ready, fire, aim. That's not a good way to do it. Contact your client. Define the objectives. Do not let someone start a project or force you to start a project without your objectives being defined. It's a recipe for disaster. And the scope. Simultaneously, right after that, we need to look at that scope. Remember, time, cost, and quality. Fill up that triangle to the maximum. Do not exceed it. And do not let someone else talk you into delivering on all three of those or increasing the value of all three. Time, shorter time, cost, less cost, quality, higher quality. Tell them to pick two. Once your project starts to change, tell them to pick two. The tasks, define the tasks that consider due dates. And as you walk through project management, you can use a lot of tools. You can use Gantt charts. Who's heard of Gantt charts? I know the SI students are happy that we're not doing a couple of those Gantt charts this year. A Gantt chart is a great way. It'll track parallel and sequential processing with dates, and it'll force you to stay on track, on time, and on budget. Basecamp, which we talked about yesterday, is another tool that you can use that'll define the task that considers due dates and make sure that you have someone that is absolutely responsible for those times. Assign the tasks to the team members. What I see students doing more often than not is trying to do too much themselves. And I'm guilty of that as well. I can take it on. If there are 10 things to do and you have 3 people on your project and you're doing 8 of the 10 things, there's a problem. There's a big problem. Get comfortable with delegation. I'm not talking about dictation. There's a big difference. There's a leader delegates and a dictator dictates. So we want to make sure we stay in the leadership mode. We want to make sure that we delegate as we go through this. Get your team members to help you out. Loop back. Are we understanding the project again? Does the client know what's going on? Are we still tracking our objectives? Has the scope creeped on us? If you keep these basics in mind, and especially if you focus on the objectives and you focus on the scope, you're going to have a great start at project management. There's a lot of tools out there. There's a lot of complicated and expensive tools, and there's a lot of simple tools. There's no substitute for a common sense, methodical approach on this and great communication.